Welcome to Family Business World. I'm your host, Dr. Dale Caldwell, and I'm honored to have another outstanding guest, Chief Jonathan Parham, the president of the Blue Innovation LLC. Chief, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, sir. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me on this morning.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk today. I've learned so much from you in talking to you over the last few months about police, about evaluations, and other things. But before we get into that, I always like to find out who my guests are. And so tell me a little about your background. Now, where were you born and where did you go to high school, et cetera, et cetera?
I was actually born in Newark, New Jersey. My family, my parents lived there for a relatively short period of time right before I was born, and we moved to Linden right after that. My brother and I, he's 1 year older than I am, so I spent the majority of my life growing up in Linden, New Jersey. Great town. I went to high school there, and ultimately joined the police department in Linden as well.
So what prompted joining the police department? I mean, today we're going to talk about family business and police, and we've heard a lot of information and misinformation about police. But you're a young guy, you're smart, you have all sorts of options. Why did you decide to join the police?
Well, I tell you, I was about 15 years old. My brother and I were sitting on the steps of my home in Linden, and we lived in a relatively quiet neighborhood. But adjacent to where we lived was a pretty active part of town. It's minority based. Majority of minorities in the city lived in that area, and it had the most amount of criminal activity. Not necessarily on our street, but near us. One day, we're sitting on the steps, and my brother and I were either looking at a comic book or talking or passing time, and a few of our friends walked down the street. We waved, said something to them, kind of joked a little bit, and they continued to walk. Shortly thereafter, a police car pulled up behind them, blew the horn, motioned for them to stop, and they did. The officers got out. It happened to be two white officers, and they began talking to our friends. And immediately the conversation went sideways. The officers were abrupt, they were rude, they were a little physically assaultive, grabbed my friends, threw them on the car, began talking to them. And as I'm sitting there, my brother and I were in complete shock. Of course, we were angry, but above all else, we felt disrespected and we felt helpless, that we could not do anything. We couldn't hear the content of the conversation, but we could see the anger in the faces and the distress on the faces of our friends. Ultimately, the encounter ended. My friends got shoved around a little bit. I think one got slapped in the head, and then they were let go. And they looked at us, and we looked at them, and it was an unspoken feeling of, "Can you believe what just happened?" And they walked away. So I had tears in my eyes, thinking about, this could be me. This is the world that we live in. Here's what's going on. What can we do? And at that moment, I recalled that my father was in the driveway of our home fixing the car. So I got up and I ran to him and I started explaining to him what happened. And I said, our friends, they weren't doing anything wrong, and that's sort of nasty, and they push around, and somebody's got to do something about it. This is just unacceptable. So my father sort of slowly wiped his hands off, and he put the hood down on the car, and he kind of finished changing the oil, and he looked at me and he says, "Well, I tell you, if you want to come up with a plan on how we can address this, then keep talking. But if all you want to do is complain, then shut up." And at that point, I kind of stopped. And I wasn't certain who I was more upset with, my father or the police. And I looked at him, and again, I said, "But Dad," tears are coming down my face. And I said, "Dad, somebody's got to do something." And he reached out and he grabbed me behind my neck with his hand. Still had oil on it. He didn't get all the oil off. And he put my forehead to his forehead. And he said, "You've just been given a gift. When you get to that point in your life where you feel so enraged about something, and you say to yourself that somebody has to do something, that somebody is you,
Wonderful.
and that something is for you to figure out."
Wonderful.
And at that point, I realized I've got to do something. And the only thing I could think of as a young teenager is, I need to be a police officer. I had to solve this from the inside. I will fast forward that story to the date that I graduated the academy, and my father was standing there, and he said, based upon all the things that I've gone through in my life, meaning my father's life, he grew up and in Alabama, and he'd seen people hung, and he'd seen
Wow.
racism, up close. He said, "I can't believe that you became a police officer. I'm very
Wow.
proud of you, but I can't understand it."
Wow.
And I said to him, "Dad, don't you remember? We were sitting on the steps, and the kids got stopped, and I ran to you and told you the story, and you told me that I got to do something about it." And he looked at me in a very serious face, and he said, "If I had known that conversation would have led to this, I never would have said anything."
Wow.
And that
Wow.
was because he was upset with me. It was because he was scared. He was fearful for the life of his son, recognizing what he had already seen, and only surmising what I was about to encounter.
Wonderful. What a great story. And as you know, we'll talk a little bit about I wrote this book, Intelligent Influence, about influence. And influence is a product of is really the root why we do what we do. And that story is amazing. His influences combined with your influences, and to really make you the person you are. That's phenomenal, Chief. And so you go through the academy. You join the Linden Police. Is that where you started?
Yes, I started with the Linden Police Department, and at that time there were 135 officers in the police department, and there was only one other African American officer.
Wow.
He was an older gentleman. He was a detective, well-respected man. And in my head, I thought maybe I could connect to him, but he was so far removed from me that I literally was on my own. And it's incredible the effects of bias or racism or prejudice, and it's not the fact that people will call you names or anything. It's that they have assumptions. For example, when I came on the police department, they said, "Well, here's a young African American man. We have a perfect assignment for him. We're going to send him to the projects, and he's going to do undercover narcotics work." And at that point, I'm coming on the police department, and the socialization process is you have to fit in. It's a job that you cannot do by yourself.
Right.
So first, when they asked me to do this assignment, they said, "Hey, we've got an assignment that's perfect for you." Here I am wanting to please my bosses and to fit in. And I said, "Of course, I'll do this." And I'll make a long story short. I go out to this particular housing project in another town, and they say, "All you have to do is go over there and meet this guy. We'll have an informant with you. Meet this guy and ask for two." I said, "Okay, well, that sounds pretty easy." I walk out there with the informant, and I have money in my hand, and we're supposed to buy some cocaine.
Right.
And I said, "Okay, well, give me two." The guy looked at me and he says, "Well, I don't have any coke, but I have some dope." And the next words that I said were, "Well, okay, give me two dopes then." And he looked at me, and the guy that I was with looked at me, and they just started laughing. And they said, "You got to be kidding me. You can't be a cop because you're too stupid to be a cop." So, okay, here's and dope obviously was heroin.
Right.
Here's two packets of heroin. At that time, they were about $7 or $8. And I gave the man a 20. And he said, "No, I don't have any change." And he says, I said, "Well, don't worry about it. Keep the change." And I walked away. And when I got back, I happened to have what they call a Kel mic. It was a surveillance tool where they could hear me. And when I got back, my surveillance group literally, and I don't mean this figurative, they literally jumped on me, threw me to the ground, and began yelling at me, saying, "You're going to get yourself killed.
Wow.
Too dope? Are you insane?"
Wow.
And I got up, angry, physically fighting them off, and I said to them, "How was I supposed to know?
Right.
How am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to say or what I'm supposed to do
Right.
or what the way is?" And the captain at that time looked at me, and as plainly as if there was nothing wrong with it, and he said, "You're black. You're supposed to know how to buy drugs."
Wow. Wow. And that's your initial experience.
That was it. That was the wake up call to this is what you're getting yourself involved in. And I recognized that their assumptions could get me killed, and I could not trust them to provide any type of oversight or safety for me, that I had to do it myself. And that's not a job you can do yourself. And who was I at that point to try and figure all this out? So I needed some help. It literally began my quest for trying to understand as much as I could and not taking anyone's word for it because they didn't understand my perspective.
Well, one of the things I know about you is, I mean, you love knowledge. You're a consumer of knowledge and information and learning, which is very, very impressive. But one of the things I think it's important to say is that both you and I, we believe in police. We think police are important. You fight for police. You love the police. So I think part of the problem with the narrative is you either like police or you don't like police, and the popular culture. But the reality is we need police. We need good police. And the whole idea of the influence thing is that it's not that people are born racist, they've just been influenced. They've never interacted with a black person. I mean, and the other thing is just the implicit bias that we talk about, the fact that, how could anyone not see something wrong with 135 and 1? How can someone not even think that there's something wrong here? In fact, we just need black folks to get into the community. So, so again, I just want to make it clear that we're pro-police, but there are realities that things need to change. So then you learned, you got that tough lesson. So you worked your way up through the department. How did you do that in such a challenging place?
Well, I tell you, there's a verse in the Bible that says that it is good for me that I had been afflicted, so that I would learn thy statutes. And the way that I kind of translate is that it's good for me that I went through problems, because I get to see that the lessons that were taught to me before I encountered those problems are real, and they actually work. The best things that have ever happened to me came after some of the worst things that ever happened to me. And so my ascent up the ranks in the police department was a result of being, cast aside and kind of kicked out. I left the Linden Police Department and began to work for the prosecutor's office after about 3 or 4 years, because I recognized it was an opportunity for me. I went there and became the head drill instructor at the academy. But after a few years of doing that, I realized this isn't police work. As much as I valued that position, and there certainly is a need for it, I hadn't gotten my fill of actually going out there and doing the job. And as you stated, I absolutely love the job of policing. I think there's no greater profession out there other than maybe being a doctor or a teacher than to go out there and provide safety and service to the community. So I decided I'm going to go back to Linden. I had literally resigned from the Linden Police Department. I joined the Union County Prosecutor's Office, and now I'm realizing I want to go back. I want to go back and be a cop again. And on my way back, there were 10 police officers in Linden who signed a grievance against me. They said, well, he can't come back. He can't come back because there's this rule that says that if he comes back, he's going to lose his pay. He'll go to the bottom of the pay scale. He will also lose any seniority that he had. He will go to the bottom. So it'll be like he started from day one.
Wow.
And the rule that they had literally came from a piece of paper that was so old it was brown, it was crumpled up. It was out of a book somewhere that they found that they brought to the mayor, who was the appointing authority or the appropriate authority to make those decisions. And he looked at me and he said, Parham, I like you. I want you back. This is what we're dealing with. Do you want to fight this? I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what you have to get some lawyers, or do you just want to come back at the bottom of the pay scale, at the bottom of seniority? Now, what this was really about is that the sergeant's test was coming up next. And they felt that if he comes back, he's going to take the sergeant's test and he may be our boss. At least that's how I interpreted it. So this was their way in my mind for them to keep me from being promoted.
Right.
So I sat there in front of these 10 officers, and probably 9 of them I had trained at the academy.
Wow.
And I had known these guys their entire careers.
Right.
So I said to the mayor, Mayor, if those are the rules, I will follow the rules, but that will be the last time that a rule does something negative to me.
Wow.
Wow. In my mind, I said, I will read everything that has anything to do with law enforcement. I will read all the principles, the doctrines, the directives, the orders, the procedures, the policies, everything that comes up that has anything to do with my job that can be used for me or against me. I will know it, and no one will ever use knowledge against me again. It was that moment that study hard, because I recognized.
Well, did you go back? Did you go back to the lowest level?
I did. I went back, and I was the lowest level. But surprisingly, several months after that.
So let me stop you there, because this is fascinating, Chief. And so we have to take a break for commercials, but I want to pick up there. So you've dealt with everything they've thrown at you, and you're starting over again. So hold that thought, and then right after the commercial break, we'll come back, and I want to hear the end of this story.
Sure.
Just want to eat like one. Visit Rostelli Market Fresh, your home for the freshest locally sourced ingredients to please everyone who loves great food. Our organic meats, quality seafood, and free-range poultry are cut fresh to order. Chefs create culinary-inspired prep foods made fresh every day, which pair nicely with our vast selection of fine wines and spirits. Choose from handmade pastas, artisan cheeses, organic produce, and grocery items, all from the finest purveyors. Rostelli Market Fresh, from our family to yours.
RV.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dale Caldwell again on Family Business World. We're just hearing an interesting story from Chief Jonathan Parham. He was a star in the Linden Police, came back and started over again. So Chief, tell what happened. You're starting over again. You applied to come back to the police, thinking that you would have a senior position, and now you're starting at the lowest rungs of the Linden Police. What happened from there?
Well, I tell you, I came back and I guess understandably so, I was upset. I felt that I had been betrayed. I felt that people had turned their back on me. It was an interesting position because at that point, I'm the only African American on the job. And I think maybe at that point, maybe another one had come on. So there were two of us out there. And I felt that there's no connectivity to the community because, you're out there chasing drug dealers and things like that. So they certainly don't connect to you. Right. And that the people in the agency don't connect to you. So I completely felt homeless is the best way that I could look at it. So I'm sitting there despondent and I'm upset and I am, I usually come to work, my shoes are shined, my uniform is sharp, and I was coming in just sloppy. I didn't iron my uniform. I didn't care what I looked like. I was just there collecting a paycheck. And I ran into an officer that I had trained in the academy. And I'm sitting in the car and he gets out and he says, "Oh, Parham, great to see you." So I get out and he looks at me and he goes, "Whoa, what happened to you?" And at that moment, I stopped and I said, "Yeah, what happened to me? How did I give this situation and these people, whomever they were, power to affect my life like this and turn me into this?" Well, it wasn't them, it was me. And if it was me that turned me into this, then I could take myself out of it. And I realized I'm going to study, I'm going to read, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to do the best I can do. And I came up with this mantra: it ain't over. It ain't over until I am off this earth. It's not, my work isn't done until I leave this earth. I'm not going to stop fighting until I'm in the ground. And so until then, I will push and push and push and push. And living well is the absolute best revenge. I don't need to fight you or be mad at you. All that's wasted energy. I'm going to spend all my energy on studying, on moving ahead. And I began to study. And I recall that I learned about a study group and I joined it and I did very well in my sergeant's exam, and I came out, I think I came out number 3 on the sergeant exam, and I was ultimately promoted to sergeant at that point.
Wow. And how did you become chief? How did you get appointed chief?
So I'm going through the ranks, and it takes time. You have to go from sergeant to lieutenant to captain to chief, and each year I studied more and more and more to pass the promotional test to get up the rank. So for my lieutenant's test, I think I came out number 2. And for my captain's test, I actually came out number 1 in the state.
Wow.
And then ultimately for my chief's test, I came out number 1 in the state as well. But between captain and chief, I actually put in my papers to retire.
Interesting.
The department was dysfunctional. We had some abysmal leadership. There were things going on. There were officers that were committing crimes. There were just an inability for some of the leadership there to address some of the issues. And I was so despondent that I was coming to work stressed and I was going home stressed. And there was a horrific incident that occurred that took the life of people at the hands of a police officer. And I could no longer take it. I said, I'm leaving. So I do recall that a mentor of mine, a fellow chief, says to me, well, why did you join this job? And I told the same story that I told you at the beginning. And he said, well, what changed from then and now? I said, life changed. I said, there's nothing I can do about what's going on. And he said, well, don't you remember the conversation you had with the chief of police when you were a young officer? And I paused for a second. And that conversation was this: I had been in community policing unit, and they thought that I should be there because I was a black officer in a black neighborhood, which was ridiculous, but it made sense to them. And the chief would call me up every now and again, and he would say, "Hey, how you doing?" So I get to the office, and I'm talking to him, and I explain to him how bad things are. Listen, the sergeants don't care about the people, that they don't do anything, and they sit and they don't do anything all day, and I'm just complaining. So he's not really paying attention to me, and he kind of looks at me and he says, "Jonathan, you can't shake a tree from the bottom." And I looked and I said, "You can't shake a tree from the bottom. What are you talking about? What does it have to do? I don't understand any of this." And then I continually look back on that because it made sense the older I got and the more experience I had, that in order to have an effect on change within a bureaucratic structure, you need to be positioned to have to make that change. In order to get positions, you need to take tests, and you need to do well, and you need to be the boss. And it's not about getting revenge. It's about correcting those things that you saw that were problematic along the way. So for at that point, when I decided I wanted to retire, I had used the lessons from the past and the motivation from my mentors to say, okay, I'm going to do this. And the mayor at that point asked me if I would become chief, and he appointed me chief. I didn't have to take a test initially.
Right.
So what I did was I went to the other captains and I said, I want you all to take a test, because I don't want anyone to ever say that you gave me anything, or that I walked in because I was black and got this, or because someone liked me. So they agreed. They all, and they said, well, if we take a test and we beat you, will you concede? I said, absolutely. If you come out ahead of me, not a problem. The first person on the list is going to get it, and I'll respect that. Thank God I was able to study amidst of everything that was going on. I came out number one. But that was really about making certain that there wasn't a narrative that could say you got this because you're black.
What an amazing story. So now, and these things go by, these shows go by so quickly. So you're chief, you really see some of the challenges firsthand, and you start developing some evaluation systems. Give me a quick synopsis of at least 2 or 3 of the things that you did to develop some of these systems to improve police departments.
Sure. One of the problems that policing has is that it is we're so accustomed to doing things just because that's the way it's always been done.
Right.
And we take for granted that we need to have institutional knowledge, not just experience on an individual basis. So when I came in, the first thing I said is we're going to do what I call an operational analysis. I want to know every single position that is identified on the organizational chart. I want to know the training that is associated with that. I need to know the job tasks. I need to know the deliverables. I want to know how those deliverables attach to the strategic plan that is set out by the mayor and council and the public. Well, the commanders looked at me and said, well, we know how to police. And I said, I don't doubt that you do. But if Martians were to come down to Linden PD and take over, where's that manual that says this is how we do it? Where's the manual that describes the training and the equipment and the maintenance schedules and all? Where's all that operates, that tells us how to operate our business? And they said, well, it's not a business. And I said, well, that's where you're wrong, because it is a business. We provide a service, and that service is a law enforcement service to our constituents, which happen to be the public. We deal with human resources, we deal with budgets, we deal with all those things that a normal business does. The only thing that we have the benefit of is that we almost can't fail because we have an endless supply of taxpayer money to fund our mistakes and our inadequacies if we don't address them. So we won't do that. We will be responsible. We'll be fiscally responsible and operationally and administratively responsible. And that what I call a organizational analysis, allowed us to, for every single captain, lieutenant, sergeant, to know what equipment they had, what they were supposed to do with it, when they were supposed to do with it. It literally gave them a checklist of what to do and how to do their job.
And that's something every police department around the world should be doing, right?
It removes ambiguity.
Yeah.
The idea of policing, when you look at cops, they are goal oriented, and the goal usually is to complete the mission, catch the bad guy, do the task. What we are not is process oriented. We don't lose the case because we caught the bad guy. We lose the case on how we caught the bad guy,
right,
and whoever that bad guy or we perceive the bad guy to be. It's the thing in the middle. It's the process that messes us up. And because we are so ambiguous in that process, we get confused. And we don't have the time to relay to our subordinates, hey, here's how I want you to do it, and how you do it is probably more important than the result that you receive at the end.
And this is standard for organizations. I do a lot of consulting to organizations. Police are wonderful, but they're no different than any other organization. They need these kind of operational processes to be effective. So from there, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of time, but talk about some of the products that you've developed to address this kind of improving operations.
Sure. Two quick things. One is a body camera analysis. We recognize that we were forced to get body worn cameras because the public and the elected officials didn't trust us. I'll just say it very, very plainly. And what they said, they would use words like transparency, but what they really meant was truth. We want to know that what you're saying is what you're doing. So we got body cameras and we started to look at them and we followed all the policies. And as we're doing so, we recognize that body cameras have this plethora of performance data that we just never look at. The only time we looked at a body camera is if someone complained or if we needed it as evidence. And we're collecting thousands upon thousands of hours of performance data to let us know, hey, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Look at what the officers have already done and see if they're doing it and it is consistent with our best practices. So I created an outline, a guide, a database that says measure the performance against the best practice. And let's catalog what we're seeing. Let's catalog the inconsistencies. Let's catalog the great behavior also and commend officers for that. And we were able to do a training needs assessment. Hey, what kind of training we need to do better? And a training suitability assessment. Does the response of this officer require us to train them, or is something else needed? And finally, it was a great risk management tool to figure out how do we manage the risks of policing, which are inherent with the job. We were able to do that by looking at what police were doing in comparison to what we expected them to do.
And police are professionals, and so it's a developmental tool to really help people become better. And the best police, and most police are outstanding, want to be the best that they can be. It's just unfortunate we hear a lot about the negatives, and so we're almost at the end of the time. Tell about the other product that you have, the app. I want people to hear about that.
Sure. There's an app called Screen Sergeant, and it addresses the issue of the lowest or the least. The officer that has the least amount of experience is the officer that's fresh out the academy, but he is the most important person in the police department. He or she is the one that's answering the calls, and what they do absolutely matters. But when they make a mistake or a misstep, it's hard to recover from that. So the Screen Sergeant app literally provides audible instructions for every incident type that the officer responds to and walks them through what to do before they get there. It's not something they listen to when they're on the job. We want them to focus on being alert and being safe. But on the way there, it says, hey, you're on the way to a motor vehicle accident. Watch your intersections. Don't get into a car accident. Take a deep breath. Calm down. And when you get there, do these things. Once they leave the job, they listen to it again to make certain that they have everything done, and it becomes an audible checklist of what to do and what you should have done, because once you leave that scene, you can't recreate that. You can't get those moments back. And it's birthed out of looking at the guidelines that the military uses, that the medical industry uses, that airlines use, because we recognize that human memories are fallible, and cops are no different.
Right.
No different.
Well, that's fantastic. And so really, Dan, I want the audience to know that you've done a lot of consulting work with police departments, and it's a family business because your wife is your partner and has been supportive of you in developing and doing this stuff. But we've recently, founded this company called Blue Innovation that you're president of, that really is going to take policing to the next level and really make policing something that will be the pride of the United States. And I'm pro-police, you're pro-police, and so this developmental tool is really going to be a game changer. So Chief, I want to thank you so much for your time, for coming on Family Business World, and we may do another one of these shows, but good luck at all that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Caldwell. I truly appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you all for watching Family Business World. We look forward to seeing you next week.